This session is about the concept of offer curve. When two nations engage in international trade, the equilibrium is obtained by the intersection of supply and demand curves. Offer curve is a general equilibrium concept. First, let us examine the partial equilibrium framework, which uses the conventional tools of supply and demand curve to represent equilibrium when two nations engage in international trade. Here you can see three panel diagrams. First panel shows nation 1's market for commodity X. Here you have to remember that initially we are using the partial equilibrium framework. In the partial equilibrium approach, we are focusing on one market, that is market for one commodity, with the assumption that all other things remain the same. So we are focusing on market for commodity X. First, in the panel A, the first nation's market for commodity X is shown here. See, we have taken quantity of commodity X along the x-axis and price is taken along the y-axis. Here we are considering the relative price of commodity X, that is Px by Py. Ratio of price of X to price of Y is taken along the y-axis. So we can see that dx denotes the domestic demand for commodity X in nation 1 and sx shows the domestic supply of commodity X in nation 1. And we can also see that at price P1, demand for X is equal to supply of X, and the nation 1's market is in equilibrium corresponding to price is equal to P1. When price increases, we can see that supply of this particular commodity increases within the domestic market and supply is greater than demand. See, for example, at P2 price, supply is higher than demand and there is excess supply in nation 1, and actually this excess supply is exported to the international market. And here in panel C, nation 2's market for commodity X is shown. Here also commodity X is taken along the x-axis and price ratio is taken along the y-axis. dx denotes demand for commodity X in nation 2 and sx is the supply of commodity in the domestic market of nation 2. So supply and demand curves intersect with each other corresponding to price is equal to P3. At P3 there is equilibrium. When price falls below P3, we can see that demand is greater than supply in the domestic market. So there is excess demand when price falls below P3. So as a result of excess demand in the domestic market, nation 2 imports commodities from the international market. So nation 1 is exporting commodity X to the international market as a result of excess supply when price is higher than P1, and when price is less than P3, nation 2 has excess demand and nation 2 imports commodities from the international market. In panel B, international trade in commodity X is shown, and here D represents demand in the international market and S shows supply in the international market. And in the international market, demand is equal to supply at E star corresponding to price P2. When price is equal to P2, export of nation 1 is equal to the import of nation 2, and at the international market there is equilibrium and P2 is the equilibrium price. So the equilibrium relative price with trade in the partial equilibrium analysis is shown in this diagram. So as I have already mentioned in the figure, we found that at a relative price greater than P1, nation 1 has excess supply of X and nation 1 supplies commodity X at the international market. And at a relative price lower than P3, nation 2 has excess demand for X and nation 2 demands commodity from the international market. So only at P2, quantity of exports demanded is equal to quantity of imports demanded is equal to quantity of exports supplied, and P2 is the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade. Now let us consider offer curve. Offer curve is a general equilibrium concept, and it is also known as reciprocal demand curve. And the concept of offer curve was introduced to the international economics by Marshall and Edgeworth. Offer curve shows how much of import commodity a nation is willing to demand for various amounts of the supply of its export commodity. So, offer curve shows how much import commodity a nation is willing to demand for various amounts of supply of its export commodity. So, in other words, offer curve shows how much the country's export and import would change as the price ratio in the international market changes. And we know that when price ratio in the international market changes, a nation's export and import, quantity of export and import will also change. So, offer curve shows different combinations of export and import of the country when there is a change in the price ratio at the international market. So, offer curve shows how much the country's export and import would change as the price ratio in the international market changes. As I have already mentioned, offer curve is based on reciprocal demand theory, which was developed by J.S. Mill. That is why this is also known as reciprocal demand curve. According to Mill, the actual ratio at which the goods are traded between two nations depends on the strength and elasticity of each country's demand for the other country's product, that is, on reciprocal demand. The actual ratio at which goods are traded between two nations depends on reciprocal demand. The strength and elasticity of each nation's demand for the other country's product. The ratio will be stable when the value of each country's export is just enough to pay for its imports. So this is the reciprocal demand theory developed by J.S. Mill, and offer curve is based on reciprocal demand theory. Now let us examine how offer curve is derived. Offer curve can be derived from production possibility frontier, community indifference map, and various hypothetical relative commodity prices at which trade could take place. So, we have to use three important geometric tools to derive offer curve. First one is production possibility frontier. Second is community indifference map, which shows a set of community indifference curves. Then we have to consider various hypothetical relative commodity prices at which trade could take place. So here, this diagram illustrates the derivation of offer curve in nation 1. So we are see here we are examining the partial equilibrium framework. So we are considering two commodities. We are considering market for two commodities. X is taken along the x-axis and commodity Y is taken along the y-axis. So here in the first diagram, we have the production possibility frontier. We have two community indifference curves, which shows different combinations of two commodities which yield the same level of satisfaction to the community as a whole. And we know that when we move from lower community indifference curve to higher community indifference curve, level of satisfaction increases. So we have low community indifference curve 2 as well as community indifference curve 3 in the diagram. So initially let us assume that the price ratio is equal to PB is equal to 1. International terms of trade is denoted by the line PB is equal to 1, and it is tangent to the production possibility frontier at point B, and the point B is the point of production for this nation 1. And we know that when the nation engages in international trade, its production possibility, even though its production possibilities are limited by the production possibility frontier, the nation's consumption possibilities are not limited by the production possibility frontier, because the nation can import commodity from the rest of the world. So even though the point of production is point B, the point of consumption for this particular nation is different from point B. It is at point E, where the same terms of trade line PB is equal to 1 is tangent to the highest possible community indifference curve 3 at the point E. So that is the point of consumption. So initially, when the terms of trade is represented by PB is equal to 1 line, the point of production is B and the point of consumption is E for this particular nation 1. So corresponding to point B, we can see that the nation is producing 130 unit of commodity X and it is producing only 20 units of commodity Y. So from the point of consumption, we can see that even though the nation is producing 130 units of commodity X, it is consuming only 70 units of commodity X, and this 60 units, remaining 60 units constitute the export of nation 1. So it is in the figure you can see CB. CB denotes export of nation 1, and the point E is the point of consumption. So the nation is producing 80 units of commodity Y, even though it is producing only 20 units of commodity Y. So remaining 60 units constitute the import of nation Y. So it is importing 60 units from the international market. So CE is the total import of nation 1. So it is exporting 60 units and at the same time 60 units of X, and it is importing 60 units of Y from the international market. So in the figure in the right hand side, you can see that you can see the price ratio PB is equal to 1 line, and see 60 combination of 60 units of X and 60 units of Y. That is total export is 60 units for this nation 1, and total import corresponding to this price ratio is 60 units of Y. So point E is the combination of export and import when price ratio is denoted by PB is equal to 1 line. Similarly, let us assume that in the international market, price ratio changes and the price of commodity X decreases at the international market. So the terms of trade becomes slightly unfavorable to nation 1, and the new terms of trade line is denoted by PF is equal to 1 by 2, and the point of production shifts to point F, where the production possibility frontier is tangent to the terms of trade line. So F is the new point of production corresponding to the new terms of trade, and the same terms of trade line is tangent to the highest possible community indifference curve 2 at point H. So H is the point of consumption and F is the point of production corresponding to the new terms of trade. So here the commodity is, the country is exporting 40 units of X, because it is producing 95 units of X and it is consuming only 55 units of X. So 40 units of X is exported to the international market when terms of trade is denoted by PF, and it is importing 20 units of Y from the international market because it is producing only 45 units of Y and it is consuming nearly 65 units of Y. So the new export-import combination corresponding to the new terms of trade PF, that is 40 units of X and 20 units of Y. That combination, in the next figure, that combination is denoted by point H. So we can repeat this procedure. We can consider the point of production and point of consumption for different terms of trade, and we can identify different combinations of export and import of this nation 1 corresponding to various terms of trade. And when we join all these points together, we get the nation 1's offer curve. This blue colored line in the second figure is the offer curve of nation 1. So you can see that it deviates away from the export axis of nation 1. So you can see that initially the offer curve is more elastic since the country is willing to offer more and more of the export good in exchange for more import as the relative price of export increases. So offer curve is highly elastic initially. However, as the volume of trade increases, when trade progresses, the country is willing to export less and less of the export good in exchange for imports, and the offer curve becomes less elastic. Initially, the offer curve is elastic since the country is willing to offer more and more of the export good in exchange for more imports. However, as trade progresses, the country is willing to export less and less of the export good in exchange for imports, and the offer curve becomes less elastic. It deviates away from the export axis of the country 1. So this figure shows the derivation of the offer curve of nation 2. Here also you can see the production possibility frontier, and when the terms of trade is PB dash is equal to 1, B is the point of production and D is the point of consumption. So you can see that the nation 2 is initially exporting 60 units of commodity Y and importing 60 units of commodity X when the terms of trade is denoted by PB dash, and here in the figure in the right hand side, point E dash shows the combination of exports and imports when the terms of trade is denoted by PB dash is equal to 1. Let us assume that terms of trade changes and the new terms of trade line is PF dash is equal to, and F dash is the point of production and H dash is the point of consumption. So the nation is exporting 40 units of Y and importing 20 units of X. That particular combination corresponding to PF dash is equal to 2. That is denoted by H dash in the second figure. And similarly, we can repeat this procedure in the case of nation 2 also. Corresponding to different terms of trade, we get different combinations of exports and imports of nation 2. And when we join all these points by a curve, we get the offer curve of nation 2. And you can also see that nation 2's offer curve also deviates away from its export axis. Here Y is the export axis of nation 2, and so we have obtained the offer curve. We have derived the offer curve of nation 2 also. So now let us examine the general equilibrium situation. Here we are considering more than 2 commodities. So we are considering 2 commodities and 2 nations also. So here in the same diagram, we are drawing nation 1's offer curve as well as nation 2's offer curve, and we can see that these 2 offer curves intersect with each other at point E is equal to E dash, and this is the equilibrium situation, and the quantity of commodity X that nation 1 is willing to export is exactly equal to the quantity of commodity Y that the nation 2 is willing to import. So this is the equilibrium situation. Exports by nation 1 is equal to import by nation 2, and these two offer curves meet with each other at the point at the equilibrium position. So we can see the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade. So equilibrium relative commodity price with trade is found at the intersection of the offer curves for the two nations, and only at this equilibrium price trade will be balanced, and any other relative commodity price quantities of imports do not equal quantity of export, placing pressure on relative commodity prices to move towards equilibrium. Now let us see what is the meaning of terms of trade. Terms of trade is the ratio of the price of a nation's export commodity to the price of its import commodity if we are considering only two commodities. When we are considering only two commodities, then terms of trade is the ratio of the price of nation's export commodity to the price of nation's import commodity. In a two-nation world, the terms of trade of nation 1 is equal to the reciprocal of the terms of trade of nation 2. Nation 2's terms of trade is the reciprocal of terms of trade of nation 1. And in a world of many traded goods, the terms of trade is a ratio of the export price index to the import price index. There we have to consider, when we consider more than two commodities, we have to consider the price index of export commodities and import commodities. So terms of trade is the ratio of the export price index to the import price index, and this ratio is multiplied by 100 to obtain the terms of trade in percentage. So this is also known as commodity or net barter terms of trade. So we can say if nation 1 exports commodity X and imports commodity Y, then if nation 1 exports X and imports Y, then terms of trade are given by Px by Py, where P is the price index of X divided by price index of Y. This is the definition of terms of trade.